Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the CEO Story podcast. We've got a great guest today. We've got Erica Hansen from Accounting Transformations. How are you doing, Erica?
Fine. How are you?
Fantastic. Really excited because, as you guys know, my background is in accounting and finance. So we get a fellow accountant on today just to dig into transformational accounting, what that means, and kind of take accountants out of their regular old boxes and show you the power of what a good accountant and bookkeeper can do for your business and help you elevate to the next level. So with that being said, Erica, why don't you start by just sharing a little bit at high level about yourself and your background, and then we'll dig into accounting transformation.
So my background, I was the type of accountant after college that would take all the nasty jobs that nobody else wanted. So I learned things very quickly. I didn't go the public accounting route. I went private accounting and wore many hats and got to do lots and lots and lots of different things through several different industries, everything from government contractors to construction to restaurant to tech companies, lots of things in between. Did some consulting in between, working, full-time permanent for companies, worked for different sizes of companies, everything from little mom and pops to mid-size to very large guys.
Which one did you enjoy more?
I think the mid-range and the small are the most fun, just because you get to make such a big impact so quickly, right? They're more agile. Mm-hmm. Large companies have certain ways of doing things. And sometimes if you need to make changes, it's a little harder, right? Because that's the way we've always done it.
That's literally the biggest battle I had with Flowserve, the company that I worked for, compared to the smaller mom and pops that I was working for before I joined them. It was like I could put my impression on this company, help mold it into the right direction or the new direction without all of those battles. When I was working for Flowserve, this is a big $4 billion company, tens of thousands of employees globally. No, we've always done it this way. And it's just I hate that term now. And like, if anyone tells me that now, it instantly triggers me. And it's like, just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean that's the proper way to do it or the most efficient way to do it. So
you should be at a very big legacy company like Boeing.
Oh, it's even more so.
So you've got all this legacy. And I was in a division that did government services.
Okay, so even more
we were
strict.
A services group in a manufacturing company, right? And we were made up of engineers and accountants. There's lots of other people in the company, but the majority is either an engineer or an accountant of some sort. And going against one Boeing that's always got their procedures for, manufacturing, and saying, well, that's not actually the way we do business, even though we're still the same company. So it was very interesting. You had to be very good at making a business case for why this process didn't work for you.
I feel the pain all too. You're opening up a very old wound, and we can move swiftly on because we're very much in agreement on that. But let's talk about your business, which is Accounting Transformation, and we'll put the link below for all of the yous that are watching. The key three pillars, we talk about people, process, and accounting. What does that mean to you, and how do you help direct your business within those three pillars?
So the pillars, when you're looking at a problem with accounting, it's normally in three different buckets, which are the pillars, right? Okay. It's people related, it's process related, or it's systems related, right? Yep. The accounting systems or auxiliary systems. And if you're not addressing all three of those areas, then you're going to miss something in the transition. So something I'm really passionate about is people.
Yeah.
Right. Uh-huh. Having the right people in the right place at the right time, doing the right things, which means you have to invest in your people. And so many companies today don't invest the time and energy it takes to develop their people. And I'm not just talking about developing managers, which is extremely important.
I couldn't agree more with you.
I'm also talking about developing everyone, because you can't build a high performance team without developing everyone on the team.
Totally agree. One of the things that we use in my business here, and I've used in many other businesses that I was helping with CFO services with, is the EOS philosophy. So they literally talk about right people, right seats, have the vision, have the quarterly goals, the rocks, and kind of aligns everybody. And if you're misaligned for any reason, whether it's a cultural fit, whether it's a work fit, it shows very, very quickly. So EOS has been a great tool for us that we've used and just helps us iron out those people issues. And we then use things like top grading to bring in more talent. And one of the key things we use from a people perspective is to ask the A players in our team if they know any other A players, regardless of industry, regardless of job, regardless of anything. Because if you know another A player, there may be a time or place that you need to up the staff or replace someone, and you've already then started planting those seeds to get more A players in your team. Because I would argue that people are the biggest valued item that are not on any balance sheet anywhere.
And they can impact your balance sheet very easily.
Very easily.
And I've had several people that have worked with me at multiple companies. I have one gentleman that worked for me at 3 different companies. So when you find that talent, you keep that talent.
100%.
But at the same time, when you find a manager that you can trust, would you follow them? And the answer is probably. I've been in some, doing the accounting transformations, you come into a hornet's nest, right? In some situations, nothing's working. It's like everything you touch is napalm. But when you are inviting when you have an employee that you are thinking about hiring and you've worked with them before, one, it's a known commodity.
Yeah.
But when you come to them and you tell them, okay, I just started at this new company, we're having to build an entire new team from scratch. I want you to come in, but by the way, it's a hornet's nest and nothing's working. And they still say yes, that's awesome. And the things that one of those high performance teams can accomplish is just phenomenal, right? When you see them hitting on all cylinders and things starting to fall into place, it's just it's like a high. Right? When everything starts working through and you see everything falling together.
How do you go about bringing in the right people? So you mentioned one example there of known commodity, which is fantastic. But for the majority of people listening, they're not going to have a huge database of talent that they've worked with or liked or want to take to the next gig. What tools and tricks and tips have you seen that's been successful for you and your clients on attracting the right people, and then secondly, retaining those good people?
The first step is you have to know what you need, right? If you don't understand the work or what's needed or where it's going, you're going to hire the wrong person. For instance, accountants. There's 2 general types of accountants, right? You've got technical accountants and you've got operational accountants. And they think differently. That's the different parts of their brains make them very good at what they do. If you're going to try to hire, you have a mess on your hands, you're trying to reorganize your department, but you're going to hire a technical accountant, that technical accountant, because of the way they think, can't always transition into an operational accountant. They just don't have the skill set. They don't have that broad knowledge to be able to pull from. So, for instance, a lot of people will say, I want someone who only has audit background, right? And I want them to come in and I want to do this operational role, but things are a little messy and I need you to take care of it. Not everybody that's in an audit background has the skill set to be thrown into that hornet's nest and reorganize it.
Yeah, and in EOS, we call that right person, right seat, where we're always evaluating on a quarterly basis what makes this person good at what they do versus what we need them to do. Does that mesh? And I would argue that that's the same as just because you're a good employee doesn't mean you'd be a good manager either. If you're going to promote within, or it's a different skill set altogether. So one of the things that we use to kind of be super clear on before we go through the recruiting process, because it's costing us a lot of money to put people through this process, is a clear job description, but really fleshed out to, hey, this is what we need. This is ideal. This is core. This is nice to have. because you also have got to match it against the person's skill set as well.
And you also need to make sure that that person is going to fit in with the existing team. If there's an existing team,
yeah,
right?
It's a huge thing.
Because if there's an abrasive personality, no matter how good they are, it's going to be detrimental to the team, right? So you're building that team. You want to take that team places. The other thing that you have to do is you have to be willing to put the time and energy into that employee. And so I've gotten really good at picking talent, and I love to find the diamond in the rough. The employee that may be a little green, but they have this. Okay, so I grew up in the South. My grandmother used to call it gumption. I had that Southern grandmother.
Okay.
She called it gumption. And it's that, it's hunger. It's, I can learn anything if you're willing to teach me. I want to learn.
Desire, the drive.
It's that desire. It's that drive, right? Sometimes you just can't quite put your finger on it, but you can feel it.
Yeah.
If I can have an employee that has that drive and that want, that burning need, then I can teach them anything.
How do you find those people?
You have to give people a chance. You have to give people a chance. And sometimes it's not always about their background. You have to sit and you actually have to talk to someone. If you do an interview for 15 minutes and you haven't made a decision on that person, then perhaps you're not asking the right questions. Really have a conversation with them, because when you do, you'll start to see little things that make you say, oh, okay, so maybe I can use them in this way, or this would be a good complement to the existing team. So things of that nature, but you have to really be actually wanting to look for it. And right now, everybody is just trying to churn and burn everything, right? Everybody's going so quick, so fast, and they're trying to hire so fast, and hiring is taking a lot longer than it used to now. And we're running out of accountants. I mean, we had a 17% decrease in the last 2 years of people leaving accounting. I mean, they just completely left the industry. That's about 300,000 people. And the accounting enrollment for colleges is down for the last 2 years. So we're going to have an even more importance on talent and holding on to talent in the accounting industry in the next few years.
There's a few things that come to mind there. The first one is, do you have a set of semi-structured questions that help you get to know that person that you're interviewing?
I like to ask those really, really hard questions. One of the questions I like to ask, because I like to see, everybody hates behavioral questions.
Yep.
But I always ask them, so if you had a box and you were trying to build a great manager, what would you put in the box? And I just try to see what they're going to say. A lot of people will say, well, not a micromanager. I want somebody who's going to help me grow. I want someone who's going to teach me. I want someone who gives me opportunities. They usually say things of that nature. And those are the ones that you're like, okay, let's talk to this person a little bit further. So it's a crazy question to ask. And people look at you like, oh, you just asked me about a box. But yeah, I did just ask you about a box.
You're making them think on the fly and see how their brain works at a deeper level than just, what are your 3 biggest strengths and 3 biggest weaknesses? Like, it's a bit of a terrible question.
And when you ask them that question, sometimes it throws them a little off guard. So I, help them drop their guard so we can have that conversation, because, when you're having an interview, everything's at alert. You're at high alert because you don't want to say anything you don't want to. And when you start having that, you start pushing that conversation, then that's where you really start to see that person and you start getting ideas about what they're capable of. But of course, it all starts with, do you know what you need?
Yeah. So that comes back to a clear job description, roles, responsibilities, and narrowing down that, because especially when we were doing CFO services quite heavily, people have this notion that, I need a CFO to come sort this out. Our first question is, okay, well, what's the scope of work? Are we talking about these 3 things? Are we talking about these 300 things? Because the price is going to be very different for these 300 things than it is for these 3 things. But business owners or entrepreneurs, especially at the early stages, don't really have that together, the vast majority of them, or they just think that there's a quick fix to it. Let me just get this person in and have them figure it out. But the more pre-work you do as the business owner or the entrepreneur, the easier that whole process of finding the right talent becomes. And then the second part of the question was, how do you then go about retaining that talent to stay with you for a long time and develop it?
That's where the other 2 pillars come in, right?
Okay.
So that's where processes come in place.
Yep.
You have to give them a roadmap. And if you give those great employees a roadmap, then they know what their responsibilities are. They understand how they're supposed to do it. They understand when they need to go outside of certain lines, like when something gets injected into the mix, a new project, they know when to start raising their hands. You foster a teaching and learning environment, because that way they don't feel like if they make a mistake, they can't fix it. They have to learn from it. And a good manager is a manager who is not just the teacher all the time. They can be the learner as well. So that, builds that high performance mentality, right? So then you lay the processes and you lay the groundwork. And if you're laying the groundwork right with accounting, that's your core processes. If those core processes are working smoothly, then you can start adding in crazy projects like new systems or, new reporting or, whatever projects, new rollouts of new product, so that you can address those issues. The last pillar is accounting systems, right? You want to have the systems that aid everybody as a resource, not cause more problems. So if you have the right systems, you have the right processes, you have the right people in place, then you start building on that and building that team so that they can address whatever it is, and you can keep raising the bar.
Got it. I'm a very visual person, right? So when I talk about processes, I'm logical, typical accountant mold, right? It's like, give me the logic, give me the step by step. Okay, now I can visualize it. I use flow diagrams a hell of a lot because it's super simple. Hey, this is step 1. It leads to step 2. It leads to step 3. So when we're creating processes in my company, we always start with a flow diagram. It's like, hey, this is the beginning. This is the end. These are the key steps. The part where we fail a lot, mainly meaning I fail a lot, is then the next level of detail, right? I don't then say, hey, here's how to actually do each one of these things because it's in here. And it's no good in here. It has to be down on paper, because now if I can't hand that off to someone and say, hey, here's a clear map of how to be successful in this one task, and then transmit that one into the 100 of tasks and set people up for success, I think that's where a lot of companies fall down as well.
I call that the logistics mindset, right? And founders may have wonderful ideas, but some of them don't have the logistics mindset, right? They're like, we're going to do this. And then you ask them, how? How exactly are we going to do this? And they're like, you just take care of it. Right. So we've been in that situation. We'll figure it out. Yeah. But you never actually figure it out because you don't have the step-by-step process. Yeah. And so, that's when I decided that I wanted to multiply myself, right? I want to give people that roadmap to understanding how to do that accounting transformation, whether it means if you're going to go with a consultant, how to get the consultant involved with your teams so that the teams can start making decisions on their own. Because you don't want to be, I love consulting, but you don't want to be beholden to a consultant for the rest of your life.
Can't be the bottleneck. Yeah, 100%.
So you've got to teach your teams to do those things for themselves. They've got to be able to think for themselves so that they can make the next decision and they can thrive from it.
Have the discretion and the delegation available to say, yeah, I can make this decision. I know it's the right one. I'll just go ahead and do it. And then move on to the next task. The way we've got around that is because I've obviously identified that I was the bottleneck in that process, and it needs to not be me. Is we now make videos. So for everything that we're going to do more than once, we'll make a recording of it. So we've got a backup. Then the next step is to make a flow chart of it, map it out or chunk it down into step-by-step processes. So whether you're a visual learner, whether you're an auditory learner, or whether you're a reader, kinesthetic, I think it is, the last one, there's a manual there for you. So you can go from the start of your day to the end of your day, start of the week to the end of the week, end of the month, and so on, and have a full reference guide of how to be successful, because that process then allows you to excel and overachieve, right? Which then goes back to the next part of what you said was the systems. So most small companies, I would assume, are using some kind of Microsoft solution or Google solution on a day-to-day level.
Or QuickBooks.
But QuickBooks on an accounting software, right? So QuickBooks Online is probably, in my opinion, the best for small businesses. Is there anything else that you like or something new that's come out that you think is quite good?
I think the most popular is probably QuickBooks, which is great because a lot of people know QuickBooks. And but QuickBooks, of course, is QuickBooks. It has limitations, like reporting and being able to segregate things into costs become challenging.
Yeah. It's not good for manufacturing as an example.
It's not good for manufacturing, but I know some people that have been using it for, very crazy things.
Well, maybe they'd need a desktop version rather than the online version. But
correct.
Yeah, we don't need to go into all of those details.
But going back to, diagramming everything out and building the process.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. You can do it, but don't just do it once. That is a living, breathing document.
Work in progress. Yeah.
Everything is changing. Life is moving so quickly, especially for an accountant, that you have to readdress those processes on a continuous basis. It's continuous improvement all the time.
Yep.
So, for instance, a lot of those processes, when a company goes through an audit, they have to present those processes so that the auditor can understand if there's a control problem or not. So, I always had my teams diagram, with screenshots and the whole 9 yards, write it out in a Word document. And then whoever was responsible for that process at that moment was responsible for any updates throughout the year. And then we'd review them all at the end of the year right before audit. And then they'd all be ready for audit.
Exactly right. So we did exactly that same process at Flowserve. We had PwC coming in and auditing us. We had the preparer who controls that flow sign off, and then the manager sign off. We had the screenshots. We had the document. Literally everything that you just mentioned is the perfect way to keep it organized. Now, the part that we messed up on, it wasn't as regular, right? It's like, okay, we've done this, we passed the audit, phew, let's move on to the other things, because month end never stops, right?
Nope.
So it tends to be forgotten, or we update, or we improve here or there, but it doesn't then end up back in the system and the process file. So when you go to then check it before the next audit, you're rushing around making changes. So that's where EOS comes in a lot for us. So we have our monthly check-in with the wider team. We have our quarterly reviews as well. We have the full annual review. So it helps make sure that it's a line item on the agenda. So, hey, are we up to date with processes? Well, I don't know. Let's check them. Which ones are we checking? Who's in charge? Come prepared, because I'm going to ask you the question. So now you're being proactive rather than reactive, which really is the whole part of this conversation. It's all about being proactive versus being reactive.
So accounting is about working on the past, present, and future all at the same time, right? The accounting closes never stop. The projects never stop. The demands that are being thrown at the modern day corporate accounting team, it's a huge, huge process. Right. And you're doing past, present, and future all at the same time. And there's so many moving parts. And then you start adding in legislation and environmental changes and then employee changes, because when someone leaves, you lose some knowledge. Right. And then you have all the other things that happen, audits and, rolling out new products, which adds new complexity to your business. And that's assuming your business isn't very complicated, that you don't have a lot of subsidiaries, or you're not international and currencies and all these other crazy things that can happen, right? Yeah. And that's assuming that your company has their arms around operations. And a lot of times
They don't.
they don't.
Yeah.
And their accounting suffers. But really, really what I see is not making the proper investment in infrastructure at the right times, right? That infrastructure is those departments and those things that aren't like directly linked to sales, right? Everybody says, oh, I'm going to increase my sales team because I can get more sales that way. The problem is they don't always say, oh, I need to increase my accounting team because they're going to make the sales team and everything else run smoothly.
Yeah, if they're doing commissions and if you then group HR in there or IT in there, which I've seen all of this, and it's like, that's nothing to do with finance and accounting, but it gets grouped together.
Right. And if you come in and you skipped, there's 4 basic stages to the growth of a company, right? You have a beginning where you're working on sales, you're working maybe on your product.
A startup phase,
you add
right?
a little bit of infrastructure. And then you get to that middle stage where you are getting a little traction in sales, your product's getting a little more stable, or you're rolling out new stuff. And then you inject a little more infrastructure. And those infrastructure injections are usually as small as I can get by with, right? Just enough to get by. Then you get to that next stage. It's a scaling stage. Right? If you're doing it properly, it's right before you start really scaling. And that's when you make the big infrastructure investment, right? New systems.
That's when you should.
That's when you
it never
should.
really
That's when
ends
you
up like
should.
that in reality.
So that's when you make your big investment in systems. You put in the people in place in both HR and accounting. And the worst part is HR and accounting are sometimes the last things you think about. And that's the biggest places that you can easily get sued.
Always. It's all every company that I've worked in on the smaller side, it's always been sales and marketing first. Operations then have to figure it out because the sale's being made. Finance is always an afterthought.
Always. And there's so much risk. So much risk around your accounting and your HR groups.
So why do you think it's always left to last?
So I taught, I was an adjunct faculty member at a local college, and I taught in the math department.
Okay.
And my favorite classes to teach were the college mathematics and the algebras. And those were usually the first classes that students took when they started college, right? And the college mathematics was the ones where they didn't do so well in high school, or they'd been out of school for a while and maybe never took algebra, so their placement didn't end up very high on them.
Okay.
So they usually hated math when they came in. So they avoided it as much as possible.
All right. So you were not the popular teacher.
Not the popular teacher. But I learned a lot about engagement and inspiration there. Those students that didn't like the math when they came in are kind of like those founders and CEOs that say, we can wait on the accounting, right? They don't like it. They don't want to deal with it. They only deal with it because they have to. I mean, it's very rare that you find a founder or a CEO who has an accounting background.
Yeah.
Right?
And most of the top 100 CEOs in the country, sales backgrounds.
Sales
right?
background.
It's
right?
not accounting or finance.
So it's the last thing. When you have a small business, guess what's the last thing that they put in place?
Yeah,
accounting.
Accounting, always.
And it's usually because I can't get bills out, or I'm not getting collections done, and I want to get a bank
easy
loan.
solutions for that, right? You go to bill.com or an automated software similar to that.
Correct.
It can take care of it all for you. It's like you don't need a personal assistant to go run your errands and pay bills like that.
But people are so focused on, this is my business and my core business is X. My core business is not doing the accounting for that business. My core business is X. I know marketing. I know, this product. I know body shop. I know, whatever it is, like place X.
But my personal thought on the entrepreneur is that you've got to be as well-rounded as possible. And that includes sales, operations, marketing, finance, HR, IT. All those departments ultimately report up to you. You are responsible for it all. So you can't just shirk responsibility of one area because you don't like math or you never really understood double entry bookkeeping. You just can pay a team to do that for you, right?
But a really smart entrepreneur or a founder knows when to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the question is, when you get that help, because I've seen this happen too, are you actually going to listen to them?
Well, there's a few things, right? Yeah, I totally agree. The way I would phrase it is, if you're aware of what you're good at and what you're not so good at, you can help fill those holes, right? The bucket leaking out of the water.
Correct.
Right, where are you going to patch it? Well, where it's coming out from. But if you don't know to ask for help is the first problem. Secondly, getting the right talent to help you. Just because your best friend from high school or 20 years ago is now some kind of bookkeeper for a small company over here does not mean he or she is equipped to help you in your business.
That's correct.
So it's finding, back to people, the right talent to fill the right holes so that you're putting a round peg in a round hole and not a square peg in a round hole.
Now, I've also talked to founders that said, well, I'm looking for a CFO.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what do you need the CFO to do?
Back to job description, right?
Back to job description. And they say, well, we want to build a team, but I need them to do these things, and I need them to be my number two. Well, CFOs are kind of like accountants. There's probably 3 or 4 different types.
Yeah.
Right? CFO can be an FP&A investment growth type guy,
It
right?
could be a VC type guy
They
raising
could be a
funds.
VC type.
Yeah.
Then they can be the CFO type that, they've got a great resume, but they've been there, done that, and don't want to do it again, right?
I've dealt with all of those types.
And then you've got the CFO that is the jack of all trades, that's ready to roll up their sleeves and build something, right? And the question is, what do you need out of those? Because if you get that seen there, done that, and you're trying to build a department, you're going to end up with a dysfunctional department that nobody's teaching anything and the expectations are too high.
Exactly. And someone who's going to mentor and grow the department, whether that's growing from a venture standpoint and bringing in capital, or whether it's growing the headcount, or whether it's growing the systems and the processes, it's going back to clear guidance and what does success look like in this role. It may be all three, right? And you may want that person to be a CFO and a COO and be your number two. But it's a really hard skill set to find that type of finance person that can lead the finance department and the operations department.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the nature of most accountants, though. Most accountants picked accounting because it's structure, right? They like the structure.
Yeah.
They find comfort in that structure.
Boring little boxes.
They like that little box. And a lot of accountants, their whole, entire career maybe only in one particular industry, or maybe only in one particular size of company, their entire career. That's the way accounting has been for the last 20 years. Well, it's not like that anymore. Everybody's having to venture out because the things are changing so quickly. So you need someone who's very well-rounded, who has that opportunity, but they're very few and far between because they're all the nature of the accountant staying in the same little box. Now, let's say you've got a tech company. Tech companies are notorious for being very unstructured, right? You're very agile, but that creates a very unstructured environment, even in the structured areas of accounting, because there's new things constantly getting thrown into the mix. So when you have a structured accountant that's coming into an unstructured environment, that's another problem that you have, because not everybody can make that transition to work in that chaos and put their arms around it and make it something that's tangible and that makes sense and that can support the entity. So accounting transformations, the person doing that needs to be very well-rounded. They have to see a lot of action.
Yeah.
They have to love what they're doing, because they're going to be walking into chaos. And they have to be very good at walking into unstructured environments and putting their arms around it and pulling that hit list together and saying, these are the things we need to do, and rolling up their sleeves and digging in and saying, okay, let's get real about what's real first. And then let's look and see where you need to go, and then build a gap map to get you through it.
100%. I think building that roadmap is probably the hardest thing because, like you said, most accountants are going to fit into
Certain buckets.
3 or 4 archetypes, and they don't really vary across those lines. So when a CEO comes in or entrepreneurs coming in and, hey, I need all 4, you're going to be at a crossroads there. So the advice you would give to the CEOs watching on hiring either internally or externally, but for that finance role, if you had to summarize it as we look to wrap up, what would that be?
There's a few things. One, shiny is not always better.
Yeah.
Experience should count, especially with the things that we're running into with possible shortage of accountants. Make sure you give them support when you do hire them after you have determined what they should be doing. And if you don't know what they're supposed to be doing and what that job description really should look like, ask for help. There's lots of consultants and recruiters that can help you redefine what it is you really need. And find that well-rounded person. And if you're willing to put the time in and energy and you have a structure in place to teach those younger accountants, then by all means, you should be doing it, because those employees may be the only thing keeping you afloat at some point in time if there's a shortage.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with all that. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. We will put the link below to Accounting Transformation so you can get hold of Erica. Is there any other places you'd like people to reach you on social media?
Actually, I would love to hear from anyone. Email ehansen, HANSEN, .at@gmail.com.
Okay. And then we'll put the link to that down below as well. So thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you very much. It was very nice to speak with you.